Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people's story. Some background. I'm a software developer who works from home since COVID. My house is in a nice suburban neighborhood where most people are friendly and mind their own business. That all changed when Nathan moved in next door about 8 months ago. At first, Nathan seemed okay. He was in his mid-30s, drove a fancy BMW, and worked in finance. Though I'd later discover that was a stretch. He threw a housewarming party that first weekend, which was fine. Loud music until about 11 p.m., but that's reasonable for a one-time celebration. I even brought over a bottle of wine to welcome him to the neighborhood. The problem started when I politely asked him to turn down his outdoor speakers one Tuesday afternoon while I was on an important work call. He had some terrible EDM music blasting at concert volume, and I could barely hear my clients. "Hey, Nathan," I said, walking over to his fence. "Would you mind turning that down a bit? I'm on a work call and having trouble hearing." He looked at me like I just insulted his mother. "Dude, it's the middle of the day. I can play my music as loud as I want." "I know, but I work from home and—" "Not my problem," he cut me off. "Maybe get a real office if you can't handle having neighbors." I was taken aback by his hostility, but decided not to escalate things. I went back inside, moved to my basement office, and invested in some noise-canceling headphones. Problem solved, I thought. But apparently my simple request had awakened something in Nathan. He seemed to take it as a personal challenge to be as disruptive as possible. The music got louder and more frequent. He started revving his BMW's engine right outside my office window. He'd have loud phone conversations on his back deck, practically shouting into his phone at all hours. I did my best to ignore it, but then came the air horn. I was on a video call with my biggest client when suddenly an ear-splitting brrrr shattered my concentration. It was so loud that my clients actually heard it through my headphones. "What was that?" one of them asked. "Sorry, just a neighbor thing," I said, trying to stay professional. As I was saying about the project timeline. Brrrr. This time I saw Nathan through my window, standing right at the fence line with a bright orange air horn, grinning like an idiot. He waited until I was looking, then pressed it again. Brrrr. I had to reschedule the call. When I went outside to confront him, he just laughed. "Something wrong?" he asked innocently. "I'm just testing out my new air horn. Never know when you might need one." "Nathan, you know exactly what you're doing. Why are you being such a jerk about this?" He stepped closer to the fence. "Listen here, work from home boy. This is my property and I'll do whatever I want. Don't like it? Move." From that day forward, the air horn became a regular part of my workday. Nathan seemed to delight in waiting for the worst possible moments, important calls, video meetings, presentations, to blast that thing. He was careful, though, never doing it early morning or late at night when noise ordinances would apply. Just random bursts between 9 a.m. and 8 p.m. I tried everything I could think of to resolve it peacefully. Talked to him directly. He just laughed. Called the police. They said it wasn't technically breaking any laws. Complained to the HOA. We didn't have one. Asked other neighbors to help. They sympathized but didn't want to get involved. After 2 weeks of this torture, I was at my wit's end. I was losing focus at work, missing deadlines, and starting to worry about my job security. That's when I decided it was time to fight back, but smartly. First, I set up security cameras covering my property and the fence line. These weren't cheap, but they gave me high-quality video and audio recordings of every air horn blast and Nathan's smug face doing it. I also started keeping a detailed log of every incident with timestamps. Then I did some digging into Nathan's background. Remember how he said he worked in finance? Turns out he was actually a day trader who loved to brag on social media about his massive gains and killer strategies. His Instagram was full of posed photos with his BMW and designer watches, always with hashtags like #FinanceBro and #WallStreetLife. But something felt off about his whole image. The house he bought wasn't cheap, and that BMW was brand new. Yet 6 months ago, his social media showed him living in a modest apartment and driving a Honda. Where did all this money come from suddenly? I have a friend who works in financial compliance, so I asked her to do some quiet digging. A week later, she called me with some interesting information. "Your neighbor Nathan? He's running an unlicensed investment scheme," she said. "He's been soliciting investors through social media DMs, promising huge returns through his proprietary trading strategy. Classic signs of a Ponzi scheme." Now we were getting somewhere. I kept gathering evidence while enduring the daily air horn attacks. Nathan had no idea that every blast of that horn was just adding to the paper trail I was building. The real breakthrough came when I overheard him on his deck, having another one of his loud phone conversations. Only this time, he was clearly arguing with someone about money. Listen, the market's been volatile, okay? Your returns are coming, I just need a little more time. No, don't talk to your lawyer. I can get you an even better return if you just invest a little more. I smiled to myself. The house of cards was starting to wobble. That weekend, I put my plan into action. I compiled all my evidence into neat, organized files. 2 weeks of video recordings showing deliberate harassment, a spreadsheet documenting every Airhorn blast with date and time, screenshots of Nathan's social media showing suspicious financial activity, records of his investment solicitations, audio recordings of his phone conversations discussing client money. Then I sent it all to 1. The SEC's Investment Fraud Division, 2. The State Securities Board, 3. The local police department's Financial Crimes Unit, 4. The IRS Whistleblower Office, 5. My lawyer. On Monday morning, Nathan was up early with his air horn, probably hoping to catch me before my first call. Brap! Brap! I just smiled and waved at him through the window. He had no idea what was coming. 2 days later, I was working in my home office when I heard a commotion outside. I looked out to see several official vehicles parked in front of Nathan's house. Police cars, unmarked federal agent cars, even a postal inspector. Nathan came running out his front door in pajama pants and a wrinkled t-shirt. What's going on? What is this? A stern-looking woman in a suit held up a badge. Mr. Michael Chen? I'm Agent Roberts with the SEC. We have a warrant to search your premises and seize all financial records and electronic devices. Please step aside. Nathan's face went pale. This is ridiculous. I haven't done anything wrong. Another agent approached him. Sir, we have evidence that you've been operating an unlicensed investment advisory business and misappropriating client funds. We need you to come with us to answer some questions. I watched from my window as they led Nathan to a police car. As they pulled away, he looked over at my house. Our eyes met, and I gave him a little wave. The look of realization on his face was priceless. The investigation revealed that Nathan had been running a pretty substantial scam. He'd taken in over $2 million from various investors, promising huge returns through his exclusive trading strategy. In reality, he was using new investments to pay returns to earlier investors, a classic Ponzi scheme. The BMW, the house, the fancy clothes, all bought with stolen money. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and operating an unlicensed investment business. The FBI seized everything, including the house. He's currently awaiting trial and facing up to 20 years in federal prison. The best part? In all the chaos of the raid, the agents left his precious air horn sitting on his back deck. After they were gone, I walked over and picked it up. It's now mounted on my office wall as a trophy, a reminder that sometimes the best revenge is just letting karma do its thing. I did feel a bit bad for some of Nathan's victims, but I later learned that most of them were able to recover at least some of their money through asset seizure. The house was sold at auction and a lovely retired couple moved in. They're quiet, friendly, and don't own any air horns. Looking back, I'm actually grateful for Nathan's harassment campaign. If he hadn't been such an insufferable jerk with that air horn, I might never have looked into his background or discovered his scam. His need to be as annoying as possible led directly to his downfall. These days, my home office is peaceful again. I can take client calls without interruption, and my work performance has recovered. Sometimes when I look at that air horn on my wall, I think about Nathan sitting in his cell, probably wishing he'd just been a decent neighbor. The lesson here? Don't mess with people who work from home. We have lots of time to investigate, document, and plan our revenge, and we know how to use Google. Edit. Wow, this blew up. Thanks for all the awards and comments. To answer some common questions, 1. Yes, Nathan is his real name. He's been indicted, so it's public record now. 2. Several people have asked if I reported him just for the air horn. No, I reported him because he was running an illegal investment scam and stealing millions of dollars. 3. The air horn was just the catalyst that made me start paying attention and gathering evidence. 4. For those asking about his victims, most were small investors who lost between $10,000, $50,000 each. The FBI is still working on recovery efforts. 5. Yes, I still have the air horn mounted on my wall. Edit 2. Someone asked what happened to the BMW. It was seized and sold at a government auction. I actually saw it listed, but decided not to bid. Some things are better left in the past. Update. Wow, I wasn't expecting my original post to get so much attention. A lot has happened in the 6 months since Nathan's arrest, so I thought I'd share an update for those interested. First, the big news. Nathan took a plea deal last month. The prosecutors had such overwhelming evidence that his lawyer basically begged him to plead guilty. He ended up getting sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, plus having to pay $2.4 million in restitution to his victims. The judge was particularly harsh because some of Nathan's victims were retired people who lost their life savings. During the sentencing hearing, Nathan actually tried to blame me for his crimes. His lawyer attempted to paint him as a successful trader who only turned to fraud after harassment from his neighbor affected his mental state and trading performance. The judge wasn't buying it, especially after the prosecution played some of my security camera footage showing Nathan literally jumping up and down with glee while blasting that air horn during my work calls. The victim impact statements were heartbreaking. One elderly couple lost their entire retirement fund, $180,000 that they'd saved over 40 years of working. Another victim was a single mom who invested her kids' college fund. Nathan sat there stone-faced through all of it, showing zero remorse. But here's where karma gets really interesting. Remember that BMW he loved so much? Turns out he'd missed several payments, too busy buying air horns, I guess. So it got repossessed even before the FBI seized his assets. And that house he bought? He'd lied on the mortgage application about his income and assets. The bank foreclosed and it went to auction. Here's the really wild part. You know that lovely retired couple I mentioned who bought Nathan's house? Well, they're actually two of his victims. They used the money recovered from the asset seizure to buy the house at auction for way below market value. They told me they saw it as a way to get some justice and a fresh start. Plus, they said, they specifically wanted to live next to the person who helped expose the scam. We've become good friends. They bring me homemade cookies, and I help them with their computer problems. Some more interesting developments. 1. The SEC investigator told me that my evidence was crucial to cracking the case. Apparently, they'd received complaints about Nathan before, but could never prove anything until I provided those recordings of him discussing client money on his back deck. The investigator joked that Nathan's love of loud outdoor phone calls was his downfall. 2. Nathan's social media influencer dreams backfired spectacularly. All those bragging posts about his trading success and luxury lifestyle are now being used as evidence in civil suits from his victims. His #FinanceAbro hashtags didn't age well. 3. The postal inspector, turns out mail fraud was part of his scam, asked to see the air horn during their investigation. He actually laughed when I showed him where I'd mounted it and asked to take a picture for their case file. 4. Nathan's girlfriend, who used to join him in his harassment campaign by making rude gestures at me through the fence, is now trying to write a tell-all book about being deceived by a master con man. Nobody's buying it, though. There are videos of her on Nathan's Instagram bragging about their investment empire. 5. I got a thank you letter from the FBI's Victim Services Unit. They said my evidence helped them trace where the money went, which made asset recovery much easier. They're still finding new victims, though. Apparently Nathan ran similar scams in 3 other states. Turns out when he arrived at the courthouse that day, he was jumped by the FBI. His family from Texas was implicated on a number of gang and drug-related crimes, and due to a situation where he was in a vehicle during a drug handoff, he was on the hook as well. He ended up agreeing to testify against his family members in exchange for a shorter sentence and allowed to be out of prison before the trial. My mom was distraught, and over the course of many phone calls over a year, they worked out their marriage plans when he returned. His store owner at the DQ he worked at allowed him to come back as well, back to his store manager position. Soon after, the drinking started. Now, obviously, because of his DUI, Chris was clearly no stranger to drinking. He began to drink more and more, to the point where he was consuming half a 24-pack of beer a day. Chris was a mean drunk. He regularly started fights when wasted, and while they never got physical, he wasn't exactly kind with his words. My mom enabled his behavior for several years, saying the stress was getting to him from work and from the upcoming trial. Finally, after several years, my mom had enough. Chris came home extremely drunk one night, and my mom confronted him. She asked if he'd been drinking, and when he didn't deny it, she kicked him out. He went to live with a friend temporarily. The next morning, Mom asked us to help gather a few of his essentials so that he didn't have to re-enter the home until he was sober. While we were gathering his things, we heard a knock at the front door. We opened it to find Betty, one of Chris's co-workers and someone I went to high school with. She told my mom she had something important to share. After sitting my mom down and telling her not to share where she got the info from, Betty told my mom about how Chris was cheating on my mom with Darla, how he regularly had Darla perform sexual acts in and around his workplace, how Betty had caught them, and how Chris told her that if she ever told my mom, he'd fire her. He was the store manager. And finally, how Darla was pregnant. My mom was angry. After the initial shock wore off, she told us to round up all of Chris's things and to dump it outside. We took everything of his out of the house and tossed it all in the alley behind our house. Chris had no reason or ability to return to the house. It was rented, with only my mom on the paperwork, so no issues there. In the meantime, she called and confronted him. He confessed to the entire affair and that he was happy Darla was pregnant because that meant he'd finally have a child of his own. Mom refused to have more kids. We three were massive strains on her body. She likely wouldn't survive anymore. He refused to apologize for any of his actions. My mom arranged for him to collect his items from the alley with an officer present, and he left our lives. The revenge? Now, my mom clearly wanted to dust her hands of him and move on. She was already quite emotional from the whole ordeal and wanted nothing more from him. But Sis Bro and I had other ideas. First, we called his workplace. DQ operates as an independently owned franchise, and the owner of this branch owned several branches in the area. He was also a good friend. We informed him of the sexual acts being performed on the premises, and he went through the processes of getting Chris booted from his position and barred him from any of the branches in the area. Funnily, Betty got his position after he left and now runs a tight and clean ship. Chris no longer had a job or a place to live, and so went to live with Darla in a town about an hour away. We found out that he started working at another DQ in that town and informed the owner of that location of the situation. It took significantly longer due to there being no current indecent actions occurring there, but eventually he lost that job too. Soon after, Chris began driving around our neighborhood, seemingly stalking my mom and our family, probably because of his job loss. Now, due to the whole situation in Texas, he never had his probation lifted for his DUI, and thus still did not have a license. He never had to drive when he lived with us, since work was local and we could drive him as needed. But here was, clearly driving around by himself when he shouldn't be. We contacted the police and informed them about Darla's vehicle in our neighborhood, and that we believed Chris was driving it without a license. We told them to pull over the vehicle next time they see it, as it would likely be C driving again. Sure enough, a few weeks later, we were told that Chris indeed was pulled over and sent back to the local jail for driving without a license, and while intoxicated. The whole experience has had some unexpected positive effects on our neighborhood. Several neighbors who were initially hesitant to get involved have apologized to me. One guy even admitted he'd given Nathan $25,000 to invest, but was too embarrassed to say anything when the harassment was going on. He got his money back thanks to the asset seizure. We've also started a neighborhood watch program, but not the crazy kind. It's more focused on looking out for each other and stopping harassment before it escalates. The police officer who helped set it up said my detailed documentation of Nathan's behavior should be a model for handling neighbor disputes. Remember that compliance officer friend who helped me investigate Nathan? She got a commendation from her department for assisting with the case. We're actually dating now. Turns out taking down a Ponzi scheme together is a pretty good bonding experience. Last week I got a letter from Nathan in prison. He wrote a rambling 4-page explanation of how this was all a big misunderstanding and he could make everything right if I just invested some money in his new cryptocurrency idea. I forwarded it to his probation officer. The Airhorn is still mounted on my office wall, but I've added some company around it, the newspaper article about Nathan's sentencing, a copy of the SEC's investigation conclusion, and a thank you card from Nathan's victims who bought his house. It's like my own little wall of justice. I did end up having to testify at his sentencing hearing. Nathan's lawyer tried to paint me as some sort of obsessed neighbor with a vendetta, but the prosecutor just played the videos of Nathan with the Airhorn. The judge specifically mentioned in his sentencing remarks that Nathan's calculated campaign of harassment against a neighbor showed a pattern of antisocial behavior that speaks to his character. Some people have asked if I feel bad about how things turned out for Nathan. Honestly, not really. He chose to be a jerk with that Airhorn, and he chose to steal millions from innocent people. All I did was pay attention and report what I found. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, right? The best part of all this? The silence. I can work from home in perfect peace now. No air horns, no revving engines, no shouted phone calls about fake investments. Just the quiet tapping of my keyboard and occasional cookies from my new neighbors. Oh, and for those wondering, yes, I got a promotion at work. Turns out when you can focus on your job without constant air horn interruptions, your performance improves. Who knew? Final update. Nathan's appeal was just denied last week. He's officially starting his 12-year sentence and the restitution order stands. The judge's written opinion specifically referenced the Airhorn incidents as evidence of his persistent disregard for others. I guess you could say he really blew it. Thanks for all the support on my original post. Remember folks, document everything, know your rights, and never underestimate the power of letting karma do its thing. Also, maybe don't use an air horn to harass someone who works from home and has lots of time to investigate your financial crimes. Edit. Thanks for the gold. To answer some new questions. 1. Yes, Nathan has to serve at least 85% of his sentence before being eligible for release. 2. No, his cryptocurrency pitch from prison didn't work on anyone. 3. The Airhorn was indeed a Falcon safety supersound, now discontinued, probably for the best. 4. Yes, I'm still dating the compliance officer. No, we don't have an Airhorn at our place. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Initials for clarity. Me, 24M. Me, my mother, 50F. Mom, my brother, 23M. Bro, my sister, 30F. Sis, cheating stepdad, 45M. Chris, stepdad's co-worker, 25F. Betty, the other woman, 40F. Darla, this may be a long one. Apologies in advance. I moved in with my mom after her marriage of 25 years with my bio dad was ended. He was a manipulative asshole, but that's another story. Shortly after the divorce, my mom introduced me to her boyfriend at the time, Chris. Now, my mom worked as a correctionals officer at the county jail. The boyfriend was a former inmate in for a DUI. That should have been the first red flag, but my mom was grieving a long marriage, and I didn't want to push the subject. Chris seemed to make her happy, and that was enough for me. Me, bro, and sis all moved in with mom and Chris, and we seemed to get along okay. Chris and I bonded a bit over our love of video games, and all seemed well. That is, until 2017. Due to Chris's prior DUI, he had to go in regularly for probationary checkups at the courthouse. One day he didn't return and we got a little worried. We then received a phone call from him from Texas. The police also did a search of the home he was staying at and found several guns at the premises. Since he was a felon, he was not legally allowed to have weaponry on the premises, meaning there was more jail time tacked on. By the time his jail time had finished, it was just in time for him to be sent back to incarceration in Texas for the trial. Chris's son was born while Chris was in prison. Darla evidently realized what an absolute ass Chris was and cut ties with him while he was in prison. During his prison time, Chris started sending tons of letters to my mom, stating how sorry he was, pleading to take him back, and ranting about how it wasn't his fault. All in the same letter, mind you. Mom burnt every one of them. We moved on, moving out of state. Chris evidently got out of prison some years ago and now lives in Kansas, struggling and fighting child support, which Darla sued him for. Mom now has a new boyfriend who treats her right and cares a lot more than Chris ever did. Bro and sis moved on and out, and I still live with mom, assisting her with the newly purchased home that we've been renovating. Life's looking okay. I was reminded of this by a chat with a coworker about cheaters and thought to post it here for others to enjoy. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.